Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you're watching on. They should show up here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And since I do not have a guest today, the chat room is on the screen, so we can all share it together. I hope you're having a lovely day. Today is Friday, the end of the week, and time for our weekly update of interesting stories. And the biggest story of the moment are the fires in Southern California and Los Angeles and that area. And the big story, hello to an invisible friend in the chat room. It's good to see you, an invisible friend. Um, if you were in the room, I don't know if I'd be able to see you, but I can see you here in the chat room. Our primary story today is the burning of the Theosophical Society building in, I believe it's Altadena, and all of its archives. And hello to Renee Bauta in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. All kinds of things have been burning in these fires, including many historic buildings, some things that would be considered landmarks. Other things that are considered landmarks are merely endangered, but the Theosophical Society building has apparently totally burned. And all of its archives have burned with it. And the Theosophical Society included the world's largest archive of theosophical materials, quote unquote, with over 40,000 titles. The entire archive of the history of the Theosophical Society, including over 10,000 unpublished letters pertaining to the founders of the society and prominent members, the membership records since 1875, numerous art objects and other irreplaceable materials, as well as written works of Bame, Gitchell, rare Buddhist scriptures donated from the King of Siam in the 19th century or early 20th. Lots of very valuable things. And they are no longer in existence. It's possible some things may have survived. I'm not particularly hopeful of that. I've been watching reports of the fire nearing the Getty Museum and talk about their high-tech ways of combating that. That they have they have high-tech technology to hopefully defend the artistic objects in the museum against this kind of wildfire. Even if the building itself catches fire, the collections will be safe, theoretically. Unfortunately, it's possible we'll find out how theoretical that is and how literal it is. But the Theosophical Society had none of that. And this is a huge loss to the metaphysical community. The Theosophical Society, though not as prominent as it once was, is a major branch of metaphysics in the English-speaking world particularly. And this is a lot of its history up in smoke, as they say. Now, of course, the question becomes, had they digitized their archives? Will they survive in that form at least? And I am not under the impression that they had. I would certainly be happy to hear that they had. But just looking at the amount of material we're talking about and considering the size of the organization and thinking about my own organization, thinking about the Corellian tradition and its various churches and related platforms and the archives we maintain, we certainly don't have everything digitized because we have never had the manpower to do that, the person power. And I'm hoping before my death to get everything digitized, but not everything is. Some things are lost to us because they've been lost in various moves over the years, or um, perhaps simply did not survive. But we have a lot of things still in our archives um, that could be destroyed just as easily as these theosophical archives have been destroyed. I know that there are a number of people in our pagan community who have significant archives that could be destroyed in just the same way. I think of Selena Fox and her organizations, who I know have a vast morgue of old pagan publications, which they have preserved, um, as do I, for that matter. And I would hate to see these things destroyed. Hello to Steve Taylor. And that is actually the point I want to make, particularly by referencing this story, that if we want to preserve our history, we have to make the effort to do so. One of the things that I'm involved in is the idea of a pagan town, the ancestor house. If you've been following me for the last couple of years, you will have heard of the ancestor house before. We've talked about it here. You may remember a dedication ritual that we did last year. Um, we're unlikely to be using that particular property, but we're still moving forward with the idea of the ancestor house. And one of the things that is to do is to provide a permanent refuge for the surviving archives, where they will um, survive indefinitely. And that, for us, means both the physical archives, but also externally preserved digital copies, which hopefully will be preserved in multiple places. Um, One of the things that's been a big cause for us in recent months is making sure that we have saved the morgue of Pagans Tonight radio before Blog Talk Radio basically ceases to be. And we have been working hard to make sure that happens. We have saved in various formats most of the videos on Corellian TV/Magic TV, but there are still some things that need to be preserved. But if we want these things to survive um, for a future posterity, we have to make sure that they are preserved in more than one way. We have to be preserving them digitally, preferably not only in the formats that we're using now, but in future years as new formats come out, we must resave them, and we must make sure we have more than one library of these things. And an invisible friend says, I've been printing all of my old floppy disks of shadows myself. And yes, you should, absolutely, because there'll come a point that most people are not going to be able to access that level of technology. I have a number of old floppy disks from our early days that I wouldn't be able to access at this time, but I haven't thrown them out because in the future we might be able to re-access them. But most of what's on them was updated as technology changed. Um, since we've been doing these live broadcasts, I don't have every video saved on my computer as I formerly did. So we have to make it a point to preserve the live broadcasts if we wish to preserve them. But these are things that we have to think about as a community. Um, One of the things that Ed the Pagan is doing currently is looking for nominations for the Pagan Hall of Fame, which is part of the plan for Ancestor House and commemoration of initially 100 of the most prominent members of our community out of the past, however far. And one of the interesting things that comes out in this process, and it's come out in other questions that have been asked over the months about who people admire, who they're influenced by, is how often we don't recognize some of these names because their posterity has not been well preserved. One of the things you notice very strongly in the pagan community is how often younger people don't know who came before them, or if they think they do, they're often dealing with a false history. They're dealing with the history of one particular group, um, which is leaving out many others. And, or in some cases, um, not even that. Um, they're dealing with a Hollywood history, perhaps, or a history that they received from fictional materials. And this is because we have not done a good job preserving our posterity, and we need to change that going forward. And that's part of what the idea of Ancestor House is about, part of what the idea of Pagan Town is about. And we've talked about Pagan Town before. We'll be talking about it a lot more in the future. And it's along the idea of the kind of what are traditionally called Chinatowns or Little Korea, Little India that you find in major cities, where you have a local area that is dominated by a particular group. So it's not some city built up from scratch or quote taking over end quote a city. It's just having our resources for our people in the area in one place, and we're hoping to do a lot with that. There'll be a lot more talk about it, but one of the important parts of it is making a permanent home for the archives. We've tried to do this previously with greater or lesser success, and some of those things that 20 years ago we had in our archives aren't necessarily there now. They've been lost in various ways. Um, for example, the original artwork for the Tarot of Hecate, I've sold off a good bit of it now. Not all of those original pieces of art are still in my archives, but they are in my digital archives, and there they will always survive. And the real pieces have gone to individual people who hopefully are enjoying them and are glad to have them. But this speaks to how we can preserve our future. It isn't just a matter of preserving these physical pieces in a physical space. We have to be mindful of preserving these things also in digital space and in multiple formats so that whatever happens, they can still be accessed in the future. And Steve says, that sounds amazing. I would love to come visit that sometime. Well, that's part of the idea. Years ago, we did the World of Witches Museum in Salem, which in the end was definitely not a great success, but it was a great adventure. And one of the things we had in that museum, and if you go to the archives of Corellian TV, we have the video of the tour we used to give in the archives there. You can see it, though it does not go through every entry in the Witch's Maze because there were too many. But I believe it highlights certain prominent ones. But we created there a little twisty little maze with biographies of famous witches from history and contemporary society in a more or less um, alphabetical order, if I recall, with photos where we could. I was very pleased we were able to get a photo of Dorothy Clutterbuck to go with her autobiography in an era when many people still thought that she was made up, which she absolutely was not. Nor is the original story given about her made up either. And I think that's been pretty definitively proven at this point with, I believe, the works of Hazeltine in particular. But um, we had all sorts of figures there with this same idea of educating people about the past and honoring the achievements of um, of people of all different kinds in our history, and that's part of what we want to do with Ancestor House. It won't be a maze. I don't imagine. I think it will be a wall or two walls or a room or several rooms, depending on what we have available to do. One of the things I particularly remember that we had at that time was a lovely display commemorating the Pentacle Quest that included um, one of the decorations that um, the Order of the Pentacle gives out, um, and one of the blessing bags from the time when that case was won, and the statue of the goddess Libertas. But I'm often amazed by how many people don't know about the Pentacle Quest. How many people don't know about the Goddess 2000 project? The Goddess 2000 project was the first real cooperative international effort in the pagan community. Um, it wasn't the first attempt, but it was the first successful completion that I can think of a real movement within our community, which made many other things possible. Because for the first time, people saw that we could cooperate across different traditions when we were working on subjects that did not involve um, any area for anyone to say my tradition is better than your tradition. That was the genius of Abby Willowroot, who put the Goddess 2000 project together, and many other subsequent projects have been wise enough to follow that lead, which allows people, even when they come from traditions that may not be fond of one another, to still work together. Um, the Pagan Expos and the Pagan Pride Days um, have done wonderful things for our community. And preserving these things and their history, I think, is very important. The history of the Pagan Leadership Conferences. There are a number of similar situations around the country today under various names. I was formerly president and vice president at different times of the Northeast Florida Pagan Leadership Coalition. Um, I don't know if anyone is preserving the heritage of that organization. I was a member of the Chicago Pagan Leadership um, Conference, and later the Chicago Pagan Leadership Coalition in the 90s. We certainly have a number of artifacts related to that we will be preserving. Um, and I'm hoping that in the fullness of time, we will be able to preserve a lot of people who worked very hard for this community, preserve their memory that most people don't know about. And, just I was mentioning the Chicago Pagan Leadership Conferences. Uh, the most prominent priestesses in Chicago, who were all involved in that project, I don't know how many people would recognize their names. Donna Kohlschultz, the Gardnerian Doyenne of Chicago, also known as Lady Morda. Vicky Carlson, um, who was Alexandrian. Uh, Dina Buta, who was for many years the Icean archpriestess of Chicagoland, and did the Icean Convention in Chicago year after year. These things deserve to be memorialized and remembered. And, um, our community, if we want to see them remembered, we must make the effort to remember them. This is part of what Ancestor House is about. Ancestor House, I believe, depending on how successful the project is, depending on what we can do, of course. But there are a lot of things we want to include, and you'll be hearing more about them. Um, but why do we need something like this? Well, the burning of that Theosophical Society building and its archives is a giant red flag of why we need not only Ancestor House, but other organizations like it. Um, and more up-to-date ways of preserving our history, because this kind of natural disaster can strike anywhere. It was only a few months ago we were dealing with Hurricane Helene and um, the horrible results of that, which are still ongoing. And if you're in a position to do so, please continue to support the people who were affected by that. Byron Ballard um, and her people are still working with that. You can still donate to them and support them, and I hope that you will do so. I'm hoping that we will see some pagan effort to um, help with what will be needed for recovery in California. And, this is just part of life to see these unfortunate things happen. We have every reason to think we're going to see more of them, at least for a while, both because this is something that commonly happens at the turning of an age, and because we all know about the whole climate change thing. We've known about it for years. We haven't, and maybe don't know all of the intricacies, but we know we can expect to see some things, and we need to be working to find ways to deal with them. I would hope to see um, I would hope to see effort from the pagan community to develop more ways to help in these situations. And I also hope to see more effort in our community to preserve our posterity for the future. I am horrified by the loss of these materials for the Theosophical Society, but also because of all that has to do with the rest of metaphysical society. The Theosophical Society, while not as prominent as it was hugely influential across the board in the late 19th and early 20th century. All of metaphysical thought was, to some extent, in the Western world, and not only the Western world, influenced by some of its thinking and teaching. Um, it is nothing to be forgotten. The loss of those personal letters, which may reveal why certain decisions were made, where certain ideas came from, that's a serious loss. And um, I hope that people understand that. Those are things that can never now be researched because they no longer exist. And that research may have been um, important in some ways had it been able to occur. The loss of those 40,000 volumes, who is to say that there are any other copies of all of those volumes? I mean, you always hear that everything's online, but I can tell you everything is not online. Um, there are lots of rare books that are not online, not only pagan metaphysical books, um, but just historical books. Now, more and more of them are coming online, but from the history of publishing, there were books that never had big publications. And sometimes there may be only one surviving copy of a book that only had 100 copies or less. And in the metaphysical world, particularly in the 19th century, those books were not getting thousands and thousands of copies in many cases. They were getting, at best, a couple of hundred, sometimes um, fewer than that. Um, in some cases, people just printed up copies for their friends or their local community. And I think back in the 80s, I did artwork and or writing for over 90 different publications, but many of those publications were not printing more than maybe 30 copies, maybe 50. A few of them were in the hundreds. Very, very few were doing more than that in that day. I think of publications like Seasonal Silver, which was done by my friend Donna Lionrose, who I considered one of the best poets in the pagan community. Um, I don't know how many copies of that magazine still survive. I don't know if any full set does. I hope so. But if we want these things to survive, we need to save them now. And not only by assembling them in one place. And what's happened with the Theosophical Society shows why that is not the answer. By making sure that we have also digitized them and saved those copies in many places, so that if the originals are destroyed, the other copies survive. Now, with our own archives, we've been working on these ideas for many years. We're only just now coming to the point that we're doing more and more of this. But because we've been working on it, a good amount of that work is done. I was talking about how the larger majority of videos from the history of Corellian TV, which is 10 years, um, but the larger number of those are preserved in multiple places because we've always been trying to do this. Now, hello to Bridget in the chat room, and Bridget says, "What was in the archives besides books?" And let me. Um, I believe they had, in particular, a large number of unpublished letters, people's personal letters between people like Helena Blavatsky, the various Mahatmas, um, and other prominent members of the Theosophical Society. 10,000 letters. They had um, all sorts of historical documents internal to the organization. They had the membership records from 1875 to the present day, I believe, which are now presumably gone, as well as art and other similar things. They had some rare Buddhist scriptures that are being remarked upon. Um, to give you an example of why this is a serious loss, that membership, those membership records, if you wanted to know if an early figure in the 20th century metaphysical world or the late 19th century metaphysical world was ever formally a member of the Theosophical Society, that would have been the place that you would go to find out. And now you have no way to find out if it's not already known. What extent they were influenced by theosophical teachings could have been revealed by that. You know, one of the things that's been remarked to me, primarily by Lord Phoenix, the first priest, the active first priest of the Corellian tradition, is that there is a significant Kabbalistic influence in some ideas in Corellianism. But when I was being taught this, it was never remarked to me. I could not have shown it to you because that was not something I was familiar with. But he points it out all over the place. Obviously, some of the people who put us together had that influence, which would have come from this sort of background, which is not surprising. But, you know, it did not come down as something that was emphasized in my training, but it was still present in their works, in their ideas. And, you know, these are some of the questions that we have that we may be able to answer in the future. Where did this come from? Where did that come from? But when we lose a vast archive like this, we lose in some ways the ability to ever answer that. And, you know, in some cases, that's not all that important. You know, I'm a great believer in the idea that what matters is where we're going more than where we've been. And, you know, I've heard people say, well, if you don't know where you've been, how can you know where you're going? And that's actually not true. I have found myself lost on occasion in major cities where I have lived and been able to find my way to where I need to go, even though I don't know quite how I got where I was. But it's good to know where you've been. And I think that is important. But Bridget says, this reminds me of the Library of Alexandria, and it reminded me of that too. One of the things people mostly don't know about the Library of Alexandria is that it was not one collection of books. It was numerous collections in several buildings in the city of Alexandria. So there was no one fire that destroyed it. It was destroyed in a number of instances over time that caused it to vanish from history more slowly than people give it credit for. But this is an example of how that kind of thing does happen. this was not certainly the whole history of um, metaphysics in the modern United States by any means, but it was the history of a major component. And we need to be mindful and maybe take a moment of mourning for the loss of that information because it's important. Um, this is a loss to our community. And now, compared to all the people who've lost their homes in those fires, compared to those people who've lost loved ones, because there have been some deaths, um, yeah, this does not compare to that. Um, and I want to say that I feel great compassion for the people who are caught in this situation, and I don't speak about this to take attention off of their plight, but rather to point out to our people how this touches us directly, even though we're not there. So, with that, I want to take a moment for a word from our sponsors, and then we shall have our prayer, as we always do.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. I believe we will have information for you next week on our next auction. And we also have a number of items for sale on our website, or you can go to the Gaia Thrift page to see them there if you're just interested in seeing what we're offering at present. Now, Bridget says, do we know if more was lost at the Library of Alexandria or the Theosophical Society? But, I think that's kind of comparing apples and oranges because we have so much more literature today um, than they had then because of our ability to print so much more. So I'm not sure off the top of my head how many volumes were in the Library of Alexandria at its height. I think it was more than this, but I'm not certain. But in terms of the volume of knowledge compared to what has survived from antiquity, certainly Alexandria was a greater loss. Um, but that doesn't mean this isn't a significant loss. So I want to thank you. And an invisible friend says, I've been out of the community for a while, but making my way back now. Well, welcome back. The Ancestor House is such a cool idea. Thank you, invisible friend. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me. I'll be back on Monday. We will be doing our monthly crystal web ritual tomorrow on these same platforms. So I hope you'll join us for that. And now let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to take the needed efforts to preserve those things we wish to preserve for the future, so that our posterity will have accurate memory of us, and so that when we are reincarnated in this world, we can see those things that we did and learn from them more easily. We ask you to help us also, as we go forward, to have compassion for those who are suffering the loss of caused by these disasters that are happening at this time, and help us to find the will and the spirit to be of help to them where we can. We ask you to help to guide to them the resources they need for the best possible survival, wherever they may happen to be, because there are so many places. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. Knowing you're always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence. May you be blessed now and always. And I'll see you again on Monday.